Deposit and Publish, a digital archiving and web discovery service for WMU research. Thank you for taking a few minutes to view this presentation. As you know, the WMU Library collects intellectual content in support of the curriculum and maritime research. In accordance with the library strategic plan, it is also supposed to provide library and data service support for maritime research projects. This involves housing the gray literature, the pre-pub copies, the raw data sets, image files, and survey responses, and, within the guidelines of those who deposit such materials, to make them discoverable and useful to future researchers. Furthermore, with traditional sources of information skyrocketing in price and the lowering costs of information technologies, libraries in many universities have extended their role from curating research to actually publishing it as well. As WMU Library improves its data storage and retrieval mechanisms, it puts itself in a position to host and publish research data in addition to its role of acquiring commercially published materials needed for research. This role will grow in intensity as the level of research activity expands. We realize there are a number of WMU projects having attractive websites highlighting their research and even linking to reports and other important documents generated by that research. These projects are not, unfortunately, taking advantage of what the library can offer in terms of curation and discoverability. What I hope you will see from this presentation is that a sustainable digital repository will divide labor in such a way that project members can focus on research and publication, having in your workflow an easy-to-use, secure, and permanent home for the results of your research. The library staff, meanwhile, will ensure long-term preservation of your digital collections and will use our knowledge of established metadata standards and data transmission protocols to make your research discoverable to those who can benefit from it wherever they happen to be. This is a role we have not been ready to assume until now. We are at a crossroads where we need to move forward with one of two possible services, and faculty opinion and participation is vital to us making the right choice. When I arrived in the summer of 2009, there were approximately 12,000 digital items in a database locally known as Maritime PDF. Unfortunately, there was no quality control whatsoever. Student dissertations and commercially published articles and reports were lumped in with incomplete drafts of documents, advertising brochures, and trivial email correspondence saved in Microsoft Word files. There was no metadata, that is, the descriptive data elements about the documents, meaning there was no ability to search by author or subject or publication information. Everything just mashed up in a big search of all the texts of all the documents. What could be discovered had to be discovered in its own information silo. One had to have an account on the local network and be physically on campus to search it. It was expensive, based on a proprietary document storage system called Covio, which might have some value in the business world, but has no name recognition whatsoever in academic libraries. Last, it resided on the local area network. In this day and age, that would be an unusual arrangement, but considering that the last major release of the LAN software used by WMU was issued in 2001, and that the last patch offered by the company that made this software was released in 2009, a LAN-based solution could not be seriously considered as a safe repository for the library's digital collection. Sifting the gold from the dross. It has been a long project that we have been staffed to undertake as time permitted, but since our initial assessments of the digital collection, nearly a third of the documents in Maritime PDF were flagged as irrelevant or insignificant and have been discarded from the collection. The remainder were run through a script to extract titles and authors from PDFs using the Mendeley service, and copies of those files were uploaded to Google Drive. Student dissertations were matched and linked to the records of their hard copy counterparts in the library catalog. This would at least make digital versions of dissertations discoverable in the same way as the hard copies. The uncatalogued documents have been retained in Google Drive and are being cataloged as time permits. In the meantime, as in the Covio system, their text can be searched even if there is no bibliographic metadata. What the library has in production is better than before, but not sufficient for further progress. At present, locally maintained digital materials are discoverable in the library catalog with a link to a file on Google Drive. Aside from the fact that the staff have separate workflows for storage and cataloging its digital materials, this arrangement works well enough from the user's point of view. The problem arises when there is commercial material that we have secured permission to share institutionally. In most cases, we also have permission to share this material with walk-up patrons, meaning any scholar interested in maritime research who has made the trek to Malmo and arranged a visit to the library. By copyright agreement, we are not allowed to make the material available on the open web, and if the user does not have a WMU email account, access is hindered. We are accumulating a larger collection of this digital materials from copyrighted sources, commercially copyrighted sources, a number of maritime publications, and we need a system that will authorize use by IP address for users physically located on the campus, in addition to allowing access off campus via university authentication. Meanwhile, we have been collecting material on the open web as well from UNCTAD, UNEP, FAO, ILO, and casualty reports from various sources. The number of digital materials in the library collection is creeping back up, and we need a better system of managing them. You might ask why the library would want to curate and catalog these documents when they are openly accessible on the web. For one, the web is a transient and volatile source for finding information consistently. We believe the materials we collect are worthy of being preserved for future research, and this is just our way of making sure they stay available and discoverable to our users. In library-managed systems, we do our best to provide bibliographic utility. That means not only being able to search by author and subject and publication information, but also to export correctly formatted citations directly into documents and bibliographies. And if users have to go to the open web to cast about for good maritime information, only to have to come back to our local catalog and other databases for commercially licensed content, we are reinforcing the information silo. A key step in breaking down the silos of maritime information was taken in September 2014 when we launched the library's aggregated discovery service. This service indexes the records from the library catalog, which is intended to be a physical inventory of printed books and journals, CD-ROMs, maps, and so forth. The discovery service also indexes the titles we have leased or purchased from Springer, Science Direct, eBury, and quite a few other e-resource providers. Because we have a common index, we can perform a common search with links back to the full-text documents in the original source. Additionally, we can export citations from the Discovery Service, even if that functionality does not exist in the original database from which the information was harvested. Thus, with a simple mouse click, citations can be exported from the Discovery Service to EndNote, RefWorks, EasyBib, and several other reference management services. The Discovery Service facilitates bookmarking and note-taking, new content alerts, permanent URLs, which we will talk about more in a moment, and it can also be configured to work with the university's learning management system. The missing piece is a proper digital repository to replace the stopgap solution we have with the library catalog records being linked to files on Google Drive. The service that we are lacking is known in the library world as an institutional repository, or IR for short. For library purposes, a new repository requires an easier method of storage, more flexibility in access rights, ability to maintain bibliographic metadata, and it needs to be indexable in the Discovery Service. If we in fact partner with our university colleagues who are engaged in academic research, then we will also need a repository that allows for self-archiving by library patrons and includes customizable workflows for research groups. And the icing on the cake would be if the system provided publication features as well. For the past several months, we have undertaken a review of the leading institutional repository applications being used by academic libraries and research institutes. As it happens, the products we have focused on coincided precisely with those compared in a recent study by UNESCO. The UNESCO study has been very useful in helping us narrow down our choices. The 5 applications both we and UNESCO reviewed are Fedora, Islandora, ePrints, Digital Commons, and DSpace. Fedora is less of a repository application than an architecture for building a repository application. It's very flexible but very complex and not intended to work out of the box. Therefore, it's not for us. Islandora is an interesting attempt to put a front end on Fedora. This is something we will certainly keep our eye on, but it is too new and frankly adds yet another piece to Fedora's already rather complicated overhead. We can consider migrating to it later. Some universities are now on their 3rd generation of IR software, and we've been hearing good things about the migration process. All of these applications adhere to standards which make moving data from one to another of them, if not painless, at least possible. So while we could at some time take up with Islandora, not for now. This leaves us with ePrints, DSpace, and Digital Commons. Let's look at the following chart provided by the, UNESCO. We don't necessarily care about every feature, but some are critical. One of the critical features is hosting. If we can save significant money without having to spend too much time on maintenance, we don't mind looking at locally hosting the application ourselves, but we want a way out if it proves too much to handle. We want to be able to distinguish between users who can upload digital content, project managers and editors who can approve, and library staff who can add appropriate metadata and ensure dissemination of that data to the right search engines. Dublin Core is a metadata standard used to describe information on the web, and as you can see, it comes in two flavors, simplified and qualified. I will show you one example of the difference. You see here that simplified Dublin Core allows you to record an item's creator. Qualified Dublin Core, however, allows you to be more specific about the role someone had in the creation. This is just one example of the comparison. Subjects, dates, and publication information can all be much more specifically described with qualified Dublin Core than is possible with simplified Dublin Core. You don't have to be a librarian to see the value of a richer set of bibliographic fields to work with in describing documents in the repository. So we had to disqualify ePrints as well, which leaves us with DSpace and Digital Commons. If we continue with our UNESCO-provided comparison list, we can see both products match up pretty well in areas we care about. Integrated search engine, the ability to search across all project collections as well as the library's in-house collections, is a must. Google Scholar indexing is critical. Search engine optimization is not necessarily a deal breaker. Neither is integration with Google Maps, but it sounds like something that could be pretty useful for some of our projects. I mentioned that we were willing to try a locally managed solution, if for no other reason, just to get a feel for the tool. Digital Commons doesn't offer that, but DSpace does. So we installed an instance of DSpace on a server that we maintain. We loaded it with all our digitized dissertations, several commercially purchased PDFs, and a few open access documents with accompanying metadata, about 1,200 items total. Out of the box, as you can see, it needs a good bit of work to make it look like it belongs to WMU. Here's the top-level organization page. In the DSpace vocabulary, you can think of your research groups as communities. We took the liberty of creating research communities, including one for the library, for the content that the library owns or directly manages. As you can see, if we drill down, a community owns collections. These collections are currently empty, but if they had content, they would be called items, which could be any bitstream object. It could be a PDF, a Word file, SQL dump, image, or even video. If we go back to the top level, we see a search box, which works pretty well. We can also browse the entire repository by author, subject, or date. Let's take a look at maritime law. This pulls up 11 items that I'm fairly certain all belong to the library's dissertation collection, but in a fully populated repository, clicking a subject link would pull up items belonging to any community or collection as long as those items have that subject heading in their metadata. This is an advantage of partnering with the library to curate and publish your research. The library uses standard vocabularies from internationally recognized thesauri. Application of such library-assigned terms not only will allow a researcher to browse topics and authors across collections and communities within the WMU repository, but will also be usable in aggregated systems that index data from multiple repositories and institutions. This will drive more researchers to your work than is possible with the technologies currently being used by WMU research projects today. So let's look at the items with maritime law as a subject heading. As you can see, there are links to drill down further by subject or by author. Now let's take a look at one of the items. Here's a link to the author. Here's a link to the collection that the object belongs to. Clicking it would bring up all the items in the dissertation collection. Here's a link to the full record, and as you can see, above the link to the full record is a link to the document itself. DSpace's handle system automatically assigns a unique system ID that will remain the same no matter what metadata changes or what directory the file might be moved to. A unique ID is critical to a feature of online publishing known as DOI. DOI stands for Digital Object Identifier and is made up of two components. The first component comes from one of the internationally recognized registry services, which can be thought of as a giant switchboard containing basic publishing information as well as a permanent URL for all objects referenced in the switchboard. Crossref is the service that WMU will shortly be using to register its publication, so we will use that in our example. The registry service assigns a unique identifier to a publisher, in our case WMU. All our publications will have this identifier at the front of our DOIs. The publisher, in turn, assigns a unique number to a document and registers that with the referencing service. These components together make up the DOI. And when prepended with http://doi.org/, that number will always point to the canonical instance of that publication. The document could be replicated and stored anywhere else, but the official instance is where the DOI resolves to. When a user types the DOI directly in the URL box or clicks a link from a referring database with a DOI, the registry service will cross-reference that and link back to the document in the institutional repository. It does not matter if the IP or the server name or even the URL from the local repository changes. Ownership of the publication could even be transferred to another publisher, but the DOI for that one item will persist. Very quickly, let's take a look at the DOI in real-world use. This is a result list from the library's Discovery Service. As you can see, the first two articles are both from the same journal. We could expect that they came from the same publisher, which happens to be Routledge, and as you can see, the number on the left of the slash is the same for both DOIs. The DOI service leaves the choice of document number up to the publisher. It just has to be unique. But as you can see that the first 8 digits on the right side of the slash are the same. This is probably a reference to the journal, but again, the numbering is completely up to the repository. Underneath the web interface, we have the metadata, the information about the publication that makes it easier to find, sort, and filter. It's just text in a highly formal markup system that can be read by computers as well as by humans, or at least by librarians and code heads. Note the URL and the DOI that accompanies the basic bibliographic data. This bibliographic data is marked up in XML, the extensible markup language, and it is highly versatile in its uses. It can be used to determine how data is searched and how it is displayed. It can also be used to transfer metadata to other systems, which is good because the Crossref system depends on valid metadata in order to function. Of course, what gets published with a WMU DOI will probably be a fairly small number. A much larger number will be the content we have collected and housed in the repository. UNCTAD transport reviews, FAO findings, Manning reports, etc. We don't need to sync these with Crossref. In fact, we can't, since we don't own the copyrights, but we will want to ensure that these items are found in our aggregated discovery service. For a number of systems that we might want to sync our repository to, we can use the Open Archives Initiative Protocol for Metadata Harvesting, or OAI-PMH. This protocol is used by all the repository systems we have been reviewing. By opening the right ports to the right services and having our metadata in the Dublin Core format, regularly scheduled harvesting operations can ensure any changes or additions to our repository are updated in third-party systems. OAI-PMH is the system used by our Discovery Service to harvest our catalog records, so this protocol ensures that our local physical inventory, as well as our local digital collection, is discoverable in the same system that aggregates our holdings in eBrary, Springer, ScienceDirect, and many others. Keep in mind that we control what gets synced and to where. Not everything that we want to store in the repository will merit a full-fledged DOI. So how would a basic repository workflow look? First, there is the depositor, perhaps a member of a project, but not necessarily. In addition to uploading the digital object, he or she would provide the basic metadata, the title, author, basic information about the document, according to whatever data entry templates are required. If there is no intent to publish, the work and basic metadata go straight to the repository, where it can be viewed or modified by the individual or other project members as the case may be. When I say publish, in this context I mean in the most general sense of being discoverable. If the editor or project leader decides it should get a DOI and be an official WMU publication, the library staff will then assign a unique identifier, and whether or not it gets a DOI, the library staff will bless the user-provided metadata, making sure I's are dotted and T's are crossed, and will provide appropriate thesaurus terms and cross-references, adding that to the metadata. From there, whether by OAIPAMH harvesting or some other means of syncing, the Discovery Service and Crossref will both index what we determine they should index, and we can open our metadata to other third-party systems as well. Opening our repository to other metadata harvesters further increases the visibility of research stored in the repository. So this explains some of the underlying technologies used by digital repositories and why they are important. The critical ones work with our DSpace instance, and we were fortunate enough to be able to try it out with our own open source installation. But problematic to open source software is that it is not free beer, but more like free puppy. We have to do all the maintenance and updates ourselves, and it's proving to be a big job. This means managing the PostgreSQL server and keeping up with all the permissions and patches and backups. The interface is in the Java programming language. Making branding and interface changes is not as simple as editing a text file. The program has to be recompiled. And of course, self-hosting means monitoring all the disk storage and maintaining file redundancies ourselves. Basically, we concluded that the difficulty of customizing and maintaining DSpace ourselves was not worth the money we would save. We gave self-hosting a try, but concluded we would rather look into having DSpace hosted for us. You can see at the with the DSpace hosting service that there are several various levels of customization and features available for a price. The stock system is priced according to storage requirements. I'm sure we can get by the first year or two with the lowest amount at $3,750. But if our library's digital collection grows at its current pace, and if we do indeed assume storage responsibility for research projects, it will not be long before we would require the middle or upper tier. Looking at other features on the menu, we would like to customize the branding. Basic branding is included, but heavily remaking the look and feel would add $750 a year. Custom URL. Something that ends in WMU.se would be nice. I'm not sure why they need to charge anything extra for that, but it's a one-time fee. We would also like to customize the workflows to suit each research group, but we would have to contact DSpace about pricing, and it would obviously depend on the difficulty of the job. We have to have location-based authentication. This means IP address. Our walk-on patrons need to be able to access commercially copyrighted materials without having to have a WMU email account, while off-campus users can authenticate through our proxy server. Our current storage methods do not allow this. Extended support. Well, you never know if it's worth paying for until you need it. So if we pay for DSpace hosting, we might be able to start cheap. If we included everything we'd like to have, it would cost $7,250 for the first year. To bring down costs, we could stick with basic branding options and workflows, but we need to keep the IP restriction for our walk-in patrons. So depending on how many additional features we need, the cost could be between $4,250 and $7,250. And at current rates would cost between $4,270 and $6,000 in subsequent years. But that's at minimum storage levels. The middle and upper tiers would eventually bring a price increase. We will certainly keep costs as low as possible, but as long as we're considering hosting, let's quickly look at the alternative, Digital Commons. Pulling up the UNESCO comparison chart, we can see that both DSpace and Digital Commons support open access publishing and have IP-based access, except that as we saw on the DSpace website, it's an additional $500 per year. It's included with Digital Commons. The auto-lift embargo is an interesting feature. A user or editor or admin could decide that documents will automatically be open access on a certain date or after a certain amount of time subsequent to an object being added to the repository. This may not be a crucial feature, but it sounds like it has possibilities. Note the built-in image gallery in Digital Commons as well as the built-in PDF viewer. This would allow us to offer online reading while perhaps preventing downloading. That's a feature that could come in handy. And online publishing seems to be where Digital Commons stands out from the rest. It not only supports open access, but it also supports subscription access as well. On the left is a diagram of an online workflow for the back end of a peer-reviewed journal. It can be customized. On the right is an example of a customer-facing front end of a peer-reviewed journal, the California Law Review. In appearance and functionality, it is every bit as elegant and feature-rich as a journal being hosted with ScienceDirect or Springer. Here's a diagram of the online workflow for conferences and events, and here's the conference page. Digital Commons also has workflows for books and for ETDs, library shorthand for electronic theses and dissertations. Dissertations can be uploaded as a separate category of publication with their own workflows and metadata templates. Keep in mind that it is not just a publishing platform. It would also serve as the library's repository for its digital collections. So not everything in the repository has to be an official publication, nor does everything in the repository have to be indexed in the Discovery service. But content generated by research that is less than of publishable quality can still be safely stored in the repository. Digital Commons boasts unlimited support, training, and even storage with as many publications and users as we require. They claim to offer very granular control over access with IP restriction or user accounts, and the restrictions can be specified to collections or to individual items. Batch tools accept Excel spreadsheets or XML files for creating and editing metadata, and customers are guaranteed all their digital items and associated metadata when they want to terminate service. In fact, we can get this data quarterly and keep our own backups in addition to the guaranteed redundancies already provided by Digital Commons. All for $13,274 per year. The lowest tier in the pricing structure is an institution with 1,000 students and staff. We got a price break even on that, but given this threshold, we could perhaps inquire about including IMO and other allied agencies as well. Perhaps we could use such a platform to host e-copies of IMO conventions and publications and restrict them to authorized WMU users. This platform appears to have that capability if we could get such an agreement for our students. So now, back to the library's initial predicament. The library must move to a dedicated IR platform in order to continue managing its digital collections. Our current methods are cheap, but unsustainable. We've reviewed all 5 IR systems in the UNESCO comparison and narrowed the feasible options to 2. DSpace is a fairly solid repository solution. Digital Commons is a repository and a platform for publication. DSpace could start as low as $4,250 a year, with the potential of rising as high as $12,750 per year, depending on customizations and storage requirements. Digital Commons is a flat rate, fairly high for a small library repository, but very well priced if we were to take advantage of its research publication features. While I find Digital Commons to be a fascinating prospect, I am not trying to sell it. The library has questions about it too, but because the functionality of Digital Commons extends beyond the library's basic repository requirements, we are not interested in it if the faculty are not interested. My contact at Digital Commons has offered to give us a webinar demonstration and to answer questions, but I asked him to hold off until I could determine the interest level among the faculty. So I invite you to look over the Digital Commons website. Take a look at the journals, subscription and open access, peer-reviewed and otherwise. Then take a look at the proposal and price quotation in the document I have linked below. I would be very interested in what you think, and I hope you agree that Digital Commons merits at least a presentation by the vendors. Chris Fitzpatrick or I could also answer questions you might have about DSpace. Meanwhile, I hope you now have an overview of the issues the library is grappling with in instituting a digital repository and how, with the right technical platform, a partnership between the library and WMU researchers could yield large dividends in publishing and promoting your work. Thank you for your time.